Chapter 61. What a corporal was worth. In the customs shed at the Monzano airport, we were all required to submit to a luggage inspection and to convert what money we intended to spend in San Lorenzo into the local currency, into corporals, which Papa Monzano insisted were worth 50 American cents. The shed was neat and new, but plenty of signs had already been slapped on the walls, higgledy-piggledy. Anybody caught practicing in Baconanism in San Lorenzo, said one, will die on the hook. Another poster featured a picture of Baconin, a scrawny, old, colored man who was smoking a cigar. He looked clever and kind and amused. Under the picture were the words, "Wanted dead or alive, 10,000 corporals reward." I took a closer look at the poster and found reproduced at the bottom of it some sort of police identification form Baconin had to fill out way back in 1929. It was reproduced, apparently, to show Baconin hunters what his fingerprints and handwriting were like. But what interested me were some of the words Baconin had chosen to put into the blanks in 1929. Wherever possible, he had taken the cosmic view, had taken into consideration, for instance, such things as the shortness of life and the longness of eternity. He reported his avocation as being alive. He reported his principal occupation as being dead. "This is a Christian nation. All footplay will be punished by the hook," said another sign. The sign was meaningless to me, since I had not yet learned that Baconinists mingled their souls by pressing the bottoms of their feet together. And the greatest mystery of all, since I had not read all of Philip Castle's book, was how Baconin, bosom friend of Corporal McCabe, had come to be an outlaw. Chapter 62. Why Hazel Wasn't Scared. There were 7 of us who got off at San Lorenzo: Newton Angela, Ambassador Minton and his wife, H. Lowe Crosby and his wife, and I. When we had cleared customs, we were herded outdoors and onto a reviewing stand. There we faced a very quiet crowd. 5,000 or more San Lorenzans stared at us. The islanders were oatmeal-colored. The people were thin. There wasn't a fat person to be seen. Every person had teeth missing. Many legs were bowed or swollen, and not one pair of eyes was clear. The women's breasts were bare and paltry. The men wore loose loincloths that did little to conceal penises like pendulums on grandfather clocks. There were many dogs, but not one barked. There were many infants, but not one cried. Here and there someone coughed, and that was all. A military band stood at attention before the crowd. It did not play. There was a color guard before the band. It carried 2 banners, the Stars and Stripes and the flag of San Lorenzo. The flag of San Lorenzo consisted of a Marine corporal's chevrons on a royal blue field. The banners hung lank in the windless day. I imagined that somewhere far away I had heard the blamming of a sledge on a brazen drum. But there was no such sound. My soul was simply resonating the beat of the brassy, clanging heat of the San Lorenzan climb. "I'm sure glad it's a Christian country," Hazel Crosby whispered to her husband, "or I'd be a little scared." Behind us was a xylophone. There was a glittering sign on the xylophone. The sign was made up of garnets and rhinestones. The sign said, Mona. Chapter 63. Reverent and Free. To the left side of our reviewing stand were 6 propeller-driven fighter planes in a row, military assistance from the United States to San Lorenzo. On the fuselage of each plane was painted, with childish bloodlust, a boa constrictor which was crushing a devil to death. Blood came from the devil's ears, nose, and mouth. A pitchfork was slipping from satanic red fingers. Before each plane stood an oatmeal-colored pilot, silent too. Then, above that timid silence, there came a nagging song, like the song of a gnat. It was a siren approaching. The siren was on Papa's glossy black Cadillac limousine. The limousine came to a stop before us, tires smoking. And out climbed Papa Manzano, his adopted daughter Mona Ammons Manzano, and Franklin Honecker. At a limp, imperious signal from Papa, the crowd sang the San Lorenzan national anthem. Its melody was Home on the Range. The words had been written in 1922 by Lionel Boyd Johnson, by Baconin. The words were these: Oh, ours is a land where the living is grand, and the men are as fearless as sharks. The women are pure, and we always are sure that our children will all toe their marks. San Lorenzo, what a rich lucky island are we. Our enemies quail, for they know they will fail against people so reverent and free. Chapter 64, Peace and Plenty. And then the crowd was deathly still again. Papa and Mona and Frank joined us on the reviewing stand. One snare drum played as they did so. The drumming stopped when Papa pointed a finger at the drummer. He wore a shoulder holster on the outside of his blouse. The weapon on it was a chromium-plated .45. He was an old man, as so many members of my cuirass were. He was in poor shape. His steps were small and bounceless. He was still a fat man, but his lard was melting fast, for his simple uniform was loose. The balls of his hop-toed eyes were yellow. His hands trembled. His personal bodyguard was Major General Franklin Honecker. His uniform was white. Frank, thin-wristed, narrow-shouldered, looked like a child kept up long after his customary bedtime. On his breast was a medal. I observed the two, Papa and Frank, with some difficulty, not because my view was blocked, but because I could not take my eyes off Mona. I was thrilled, heartbroken, hilarious, and insane. Every greedy, unreasonable dream I'd ever had about what a woman should be came true in Mona. There, God love her warm and creamy soul, was peace and plenty forever. That girl was rapturously serene. She seemed to understand all, and to be all there was to understand. In the books of Bakunin, she is mentioned by name. One thing Bakunin says of her is this: Mona has the simplicity of the all. Her dress was white and Greek. She wore flat sandals on her small brown feet. Her pale gold hair was lank and long. Her hips were a lyre. Oh, God. Peace and plenty forever. She was the one beautiful girl in San Lorenzo. She was the national treasure. Papa had adopted her, according to Philip Castle, in order to mingle divinity with the harshness of his rule. The xylophone was rolled to the front of the stand, and Mona played it. She played When Day Is Done. It was all tremolo, swelling, fading, swelling again. The crowd was intoxicated by beauty. Then it was time for Papa to greet us. Chapter 65, A Good Time to Come to San Lorenzo. Papa was a self-educated man who had been major domo to Corporal McCabe. He had never been off the island. He spoke American English passably well. Everything that every one of us said in the reviewing stand was bellowed out at the crowd through doomsday horns. Whatever went out through those horns gabbled down a wide, short boulevard at the back of the crowd, ricocheted off the three glass-faced new buildings at the end of the boulevard, and came cackling back. "Welcome," said Papa. "You are coming to the best friend America ever had. America is misunderstood many places, but not here, Mr. Ambassador." He bowed to H. Lowe Crosby, the bicycle manufacturer, mistaking him for the new ambassador. "I know you've got a good country here, Mr. President," said Crosby. "Everything I ever heard about it sounds great to me. There's just one thing." "Oh?" "I'm not the ambassador," said Crosby. "Wish I was, but I'm just a plain ordinary businessman." It hurt him to say who the real ambassador was. "This man over here is the big cheese." "Ah!" Papa smiled at his mistake. The smile went away suddenly. Some pain inside of him made him wince, and then made him hunch over, close his eyes, made him concentrate on surviving the pain. Frank Honecker went to his support, feebly, incompetently. "Are you all right?" "Excuse me," Papa whispered at last, straightening up some. There were tears in his eyes. He brushed them away, straightening up all the way. "I beg your pardon." He seemed to be in doubt for a moment as to where he was, as to what was expected of him. And then he remembered. He shook Horlick Minton's hand. "Here, you are among friends." I'm sure of it, said Minton gently. Christian, said Papa. Good. Anti-communists, said Papa. Good. No communists here, said Papa. They fear the hook too much. I should think they would, said Minton. You have picked a very good time to come to us, said Papa. Tomorrow will be one of the happiest days in the history of our country. Tomorrow is our greatest national holiday, the day of the 100 Martyrs to Democracy. It will also be the day of the engagement of Major General Honecker to Mona Amens Manzano, the most precious person in my life and in the life of San Lorenzo. I wish you much happiness, Miss Manzano, said Minton warmly, and I congratulate you, General Honecker. The two young people nodded their thanks. Minton now spoke of the so-called 100 Martyrs to Democracy, and he told a whooping lie. There is not an American schoolchild who does not know the story of San Lorenzo's noble sacrifice in World War II. The 100 brave San Lorenzans, whose day tomorrow is, gave as much as freedom-loving men can. Excuse me. The President of the United States has asked me to be his personal representative at ceremonies tomorrow, to cast a wreath, the gift of the American people, to the people of San Lorenzo, on the sea. Oh, the people of San Lorenzo thank you and your president and the generous people of the United States of America for their thoughtfulness, said Papa. We would be honored if you would cast the wreath into the sea during the engagement party tomorrow. The honor is mine. Papa commanded us all to honor him with our presence at the wreath ceremony and engagement party next day. We were to appear at his palace at noon. What children these two will have, Papa said, inviting us to stare at Frank and Mona. What blood! What beauty! The pain hit him again. He again closed his eyes to huddle himself around that pain. He waited for it to pass, but it did not pass. Still in agony, he turned away from us, faced the crowd and the microphone. He tried to gesture at the crowd, but failed. He tried to say something into the crowd, failed. And then the words came out. Go home, he cried, strangling. Go home. The crowd scattered like leaves. Papa faced us again, still in grotesque pain, and then he collapsed. Chapter 66. The Strongest Thing There Is. He wasn't dead, but he certainly looked dead, except that now and then, in the midst of all that seeming death, he would give a shivering twitch. Frank protested loudly that Papa wasn't dead, that he couldn't be dead. He was frantic. Papa, you can't die. You can't! Frank loosened Papa's collar and blouse, rubbed his wrists. Give him air! Give Papa air! The fighter plane pilots came running over to help us. One had sense enough to go for the airport ambulance. The band and the color guard, which had received no orders, remained at quivering attention. I looked for Mona, found that she was still serene and had withdrawn to the rail of the reviewing stand. Death, if there was going to be death, did not alarm her. Standing next to her was a pilot. He was not looking at her, but he had a perspiring radiance that I attributed to his being so near her. Papa now regained something like consciousness. With a hand that flapped like a captured bird, he pointed at Frank. You, he said. We all fell silent in order to hear his words. His lips moved, but we could hear nothing but bubbling sounds. Somebody had what looked like a wonderful idea then, and what looks like a hideous idea in retrospect. Someone, a pilot, I think, took the microphone from its mount and held it by Papa's bubbling lips in order to amplify his words. So death rattles and all sorts of spastic yodels bounced off the new buildings. And then came words. You, he said to Frank hoarsely, you, Franklin Honecker, you will be the next president of San Lorenzo. Science. You have science. Science is the strongest thing there is. Science, said Papa. Ice. He rolled his yellow eyes and passed out again. I looked at Mona. Her expression was unchanged. The pilot next to her, however, had his features composed in the catatonic, orgiastic rigidity of one receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor. I looked down, and I saw what I was not meant to see. Mona had slipped off her sandal. Her small brown foot was bare, and with that foot she was kneading and kneading and kneading, obscenely kneading, the instep of the flyer's boot. Chapter 67. Hyuka. Papa didn't die. Not then. He was rolled away in the airport's big red meat wagon. The Mintons were taken to their embassy by an American limousine. Newt and Angelo were taken to Frank's house in a San Lorenzo limousine. The Crosbys and I were taken to the Casamona Hotel in San Lorenzo's one taxi, a hearse-like 1939 Chrysler limousine with jump seats. The name on the side of the cab was Castle Transportation Incorporated. The cab was owned by Philip Castle, the owner of the Casamona, the son of the completely unselfish man I had come to interview. The Crosbys and I were both upset. Our consternation was expressed in questions we had to have answered at once. The Crosbys wanted to know who Buchanan was. They were scandalized by the idea that anyone should be opposed to Papa Manzano. Irrelevantly, I found that I had to know at once who the 100 Martyrs to Democracy had been. The Crosbys got their answer first. They could not understand the San Lorenzo dialect, so I had to translate for them. Crosby's basic question to our driver was, "Who the hell is this pissin' Buchanan anyway?" "Very bad man," said the driver. What he actually said was, "Very bad mon." "A communist?" said Crosby, when he heard my translation. "Oh, sure." "Has he got any following?" "Sir?" "Does anybody think he's any good?" "Oh, no, sir," said the driver piously. "Nobody that crazy." "Why isn't he been caught?" demanded Crosby. "Hard man to find," said the driver. "Very smart." "Well, people must be hiding him and giving him food, or he'd be caught by now." "Nobody hide him, nobody feed him. Everybody too smart to do that." "Huh, you sure?" "Oh, sure," said the driver. "Anybody feed that crazy old man, anybody give him place to sleep, they get the hook. Nobody want the hook." He pronounced that last word, Hyuka. Chapter 68. Honiera Moritors. I asked the driver who the 100 Martyrs to Democracy had been. The boulevard we were going down, I saw, was called the Boulevard of the 100 Martyrs to Democracy. Excuse me. The driver told me that San Lorenzo had declared war on Germany and Japan an hour after Pearl Harbor was attacked. San Lorenzo conscripted 100 men to fight on the side of democracy. These 100 men were put on a ship bound for the United States, where they were to be armed and trained. The ship was sunk by a German submarine right outside of Bolivar Harbor. "Those, sir," he said, "ira la honiera moritors to democratia." "Those, sir," he'd said in dialect, "are the 100 Martyrs to Democracy." Chapter 69. A Big Mosaic. The Crosbys and I had the curious experience of being the very first guests of a new hotel. We were the first to sign the register of the Casamona. The Crosbys got to the desk ahead of me, but H. Lowe Crosby was so startled by a wholly blank register that he couldn't bring himself to sign. He had to think about it for a while, I guess. "You sign," he said to me, and then, defying me to think he was superstitious, he declared his wish to photograph a man who was making a huge mosaic on the fresh plaster of the lobby wall. The mosaic was a portrait of Mona Amons Manzano. It was 20 feet high. The man who was working on it was young and muscular. He sat at the top of a stepladder. He wore nothing but a pair of white duck trousers. He was a white man. The mosaicist was making the fine hairs on the nape of Mona's swan neck out of chips of gold. Crosby went over to photograph him, came back to report that the man was the biggest pissant he'd ever met. Crosby was the color of tomato juice when he reported this. You can't say a damn thing to him that he won't turn inside out. So I went over to the mosaicist, watched him for a while, and then told him, I envy you. I always knew, he sighed, that if I waited long enough, somebody would come along and envy me. I kept telling myself to be patient, that sooner or later, somebody envious would come along. Are you an American? The happiness is mine. He went right on working. He was incurious as to what I looked like. Do you want to take my photograph too? Well, do you mind? I think, therefore I am photographable. I'm afraid I don't have my camera with me. Well, for Christ's sake, go get it. You're not one of those people who trusts his memory, are you? Well, I don't think I'll forget that face you're working on very soon. Oh, you'll forget it when you're dead. So will I. When I'm dead, I'm going to forget everything. And I advise you to do the same. Has she been posing for this, or are you working from photographs, or what? I'm working from or what? What? I'm working from or what? He tapped his temple. It's all in this enviable head of mine. You know her? That happiness is mine. Franklin Hunniker's a lucky man. Franklin Hunniker is a piece of shit. You're certainly candid. I'm also rich. Glad to hear it. If you want an expert opinion, money doesn't necessarily make people happy. Thanks for the information. You've just saved me a lot of trouble. I was just about to go make some money. How? Oh, writing, I said. I wrote a book once. What was it called? San Lorenzo, he said. The land, the history, the people. Chapter 70. Tutored by Buchanan. You, I take it, I said to the mosaicist, are Philip Castle, son of Julian Castle. That happiness is mine. I'm here to see your father, actually. Are you an aspirin salesman? No. Too bad. Father's low on aspirin. How about miracle drugs? Father enjoys pulling off a miracle now and then. I'm not a drug salesman. I'm a writer. What makes you think a writer isn't a drug salesman? I'll accept that. Father needs some kind of book to read to people who are dying or in terrible pain. I don't suppose you've written anything like that? Not yet. I think there'd be money in it. There's another valuable tip for you. Thought for a minute. Suppose I could overhaul the 23rd Psalm, switch it around so nobody would realize it wasn't original with me. Buchanan tried to overhaul it, he told me. Buchanan found out he couldn't change a word. You know him, too? That happiness is mine. He was my tutor when I was a little boy. He gestured sentimentally at the mosaic. He was Mona's tutor, too. Was he a good teacher? Mona and I can both read and write and do simple sums, said Castle, if that's what you mean. Chapter 71. The Happiness of Being an American. H. Lowe Crosby came over to have another go at Castle, the pissant. What do you call yourself? Sneered Crosby. A beatnik or what? I call myself a Buchananist. That's against the law in this country, isn't it? I happen to have the happiness of being an American. I've been able to say I'm a Buchananist any damn time I please, and so far, nobody's bothered me at all. I believe in obeying the laws of whatever country I happen to be in. You are not telling me the news. Crosby was livid. Screw you, Jack. Screw you, Jasper, said Castle mildly. And screw Mother's Day and Christmas, too. Crosby marched across the lobby to the desk clerk and said, I want you to report that man over there. That pissant, that so-called artist. You got a nice little country here that he's trying to attract the tourist trade. That's trying to attract the tourist trade and a new investment in industry. The way that man talked to me, I don't ever want to see San Lorenzo again. And any friend who asks me about San Lorenzo, I'll tell him to keep the hell away. You may be getting a nice picture on the wall over there, but by God, that pissant who's making it is the most insulting, discouraging son of a bitch I've ever met in my life. The clerk looked sick. Sir. I'm listening, said Crosby, full of fire. Sir, he owns the hotel. Chapter 72. The Pissant Hilton. H. Lowe Crosby and his wife checked out of the Casa Mona. Crosby called it the Pissant Hilton, and he demanded quarters at the American Embassy. So I was the only guest in a 100-room hotel. My room was a pleasant one. It faced, as did all the rooms, the boulevard of the 100 Martyrs to Democracy, Manzano Airport, and Bolivar Harbor beyond. The Casa Mona was built like a bookcase, with solid sides and back, and with a front of blue-green glass. The squalor and misery of the city, being to the sides and back of the Casa Mona, were impossible to see. My room was air-conditioned. It was almost chilly, and coming from the blambing heat into that chilliness, I sneezed. There were fresh flowers on my bedside table, but my bed had not yet been made. There wasn't even a pillow on the bed, simply a bare, brand-new Beauty Rest mattress. There weren't even any coat hangers in the closet. There wasn't any toilet paper in the bathroom. So I went out in the corridor to see if there was a chambermaid who would equip me a little more completely. There wasn't anybody out there, but there was a door open at the far end and very faint sounds of life, so I went to this door and found a large suite paved with drop cloths. It was being painted, but the two painters weren't painting when I appeared. They were sitting on a shelf that ran the width of the window wall. They had their shoes off. They had their eyes closed. They were facing each other. They were pressing the soles of their bare feet together. Each grasped his own ankles, giving himself the rigidity of a triangle. I cleared my throat. The two rolled off the shelf and fell into the spattered drop cloth. They landed on their hands and knees and stayed in that position, their behinds in the air, their noses close to the ground. They were, I guess, expecting to be killed. Excuse me? I said, amazed. Don't tell, begged one querulously. Please, please don't tell. Tell what? What you saw. I didn't see anything. If you tell, he said, and he put his cheek to the floor and looked at me beseechingly, if you tell, we'll die on the hooker. Look, friends, I said, either I came in too early or too late, but I tell you again, I didn't see anything worth mentioning to anybody. Please, get up. They got up, their eyes still on me. They trembled and cowered. I convinced them at last that I would never tell what I had seen. What I had seen, of course, was the Buchananist ritual of Boko Maru, the mingling of the awarenesses. We Buchananists believe that it is impossible to be soul to soul with another person without loving the person, provided the feet of both persons are clean and nicely tended. The basis for this foot ceremony is this calypso. We will touch our feet, yes. Yes, for all we're worth. And we will love each other, yes. Yes, like we love Mother Earth. Chapter 73. Black Death. When I got back to my room, I found that Philip Castle, mosaicist, historian, self-indexer, pissant, and hotel keeper, was installing a roll of toilet paper in my bathroom. "Thank you very much," I said. "You're entirely welcome." This is what I'd call a hotel with a real heart. How many hotel owners would take such direct interest in the comfort of one guest? How many hotel owners have just one guest? You used to have 3. Those were the days. You know, I may be speaking out of turn, but I find it hard to understand how a person of your interests and talents would be attracted to the hotel business. Excuse me one second. He frowned perplexedly. "I don't seem to be as good with guests as I might, do I? I knew some people in the hotel school at Cornell, and I can't help feeling that they would have treated the Crosbys somewhat differently." He nodded uncomfortably. I know. He flapped his arms. "Damned if I know why I built this hotel. Something to do with my life, I guess. A way to be busy, a way to not be lonesome." He shook his head. "It was be a hermit or open a hotel with nothing in between." "Weren't you raised at your father's hospital?" "That's right. Mona and I both grew up there." "Well, aren't you at all tempted to do with your life what your father's done with his?" Young Castle smiled wanly, avoiding a direct answer. "He's a funny person, Father is," he said. "I think you'll like him." I expect to. There aren't many people who have been as unselfish as he has." "One time," said Castle, "when I was about 15, there was a mutiny near here on a Greek ship bound from Hong Kong to Havana with a load of wicker furniture. Mutineers got control of the ship, didn't know how to run her, and smashed her up on the rocks near Papa Manzano's castle. Everybody drowned but the rats. The rats and the wicker furniture came ashore." That seemed to be the end of the story, but I couldn't be sure. So, some people got free furniture, and some people got bubonic plague. At Father's hospital, we had 1,400 deaths inside of 10 days. Have you ever seen someone die of bubonic plague? That unhappiness has not been mine. The lymph glands in the groin and the armpits swell to the size of a grapefruit. Jesus, I can well believe it. After death, the body turns black. Coals to Newcastle in the case of San Lorenzo. When the plague was having everything its own way, the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle looked like Auschwitz or Buchenwald. We had stacks of dead so deep and wide that a bulldozer actually stalled, trying to shove them toward a common grave. Father worked without sleep for days. Worked not only without sleep, but without saving many lives either. Castle's grisly tale was interrupted by the ringing of my telephone. "My God," said Castle. "I didn't know the telephones were connected yet." I picked up the phone. "Hello?" It was Major General Franklin Honecker who had called me up. He sounded out of breath and scared stiff. "Listen, you've got to come to my house right away. We've got to have a talk. It could be a very important thing in your life." "Could you give me some idea?" "No, not on the phone. You come to my house. You come right away, please." "All right. I'm not kidding you. This is really important. This is a really important thing in your life. This is the most important thing ever." He hung up. "What was all that about?" said Castle. "I haven't got the slightest idea. Franklin Honecker wants to see me right away." "Take your time. Relax. He's a moron." "He said it was important." "How does he know what's important? I could carve a better man out of a banana." "Well, finish your story anyway." "Where was I?" The bubonic plague, the bulldozer was stalled by corpses. Yeah. Anyway, one sleepless night I stayed up with Father while he worked. It was all we could do to find a live patient to treat. In bed after bed after bed, we found dead people. And Father started giggling, Castle continued. He couldn't stop. He walked out into the night with his flashlight. He was still giggling. It was making the flashlight beam dance all over the dead people stacked outside. He put his hand on my head. And do you know what that marvelous man said to me? Asked Castle. Nope. Son, my father said to me, someday this will all be yours. Chapter 74. Cat's Cradle. I went to Frank's house in San Lorenzo's one taxicab. We passed through scenes of hideous want. We climbed the slope of Mount McCabe. The air grew cooler. There was a mist. Frank's house had once been the home of Nestor Ammons, father of Mona, architect of the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. Ammons had designed it. It straddled a waterfall, had a terrace cantilevered out into the mist rising from the fall. It was a cunning lattice of very light steel posts and beams. The interstices of the lattice were variously open, chinked with native stone, glazed or curtained by sheets of canvas. The effect of the house was not so much to enclose as to announce that a man had been whimsically busy there. A servant greeted me politely and told me that Frank wasn't home yet. Frank was expected at any moment. He left orders to the effect that I was to be made happy and comfortable, and that I was to stay for supper in the night. The servant, who introduced himself as Stanley, was the first plump San Lorenzo I had ever seen. Stanley led me to my room, led me around the heart of the house, down a staircase of living stone, a staircase sheltered or exposed by steel-framed rectangles at random. My bed was a foam rubber slab on a stone shelf of living stone. The walls of my chamber were canvas. Stanley demonstrated how I might roll them up or down as I pleased. I asked Stanley if anybody else was home, and he told me that only Newt was. Newt, he said, was out on the cantilevered terrace painting a picture. Angela, he said, had gone sightseeing to the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. I went out onto the giddy terrace that straddled the waterfall and found little Newt asleep in a yellow butterfly chair. The painting on which Newt had been working was set on an easel next to aluminum railing. The painting was framed in a misty view of sky, sea, and valley. Newt's painting was small and black and warty, and consisted of scratches made in a black, gummy impasto. The scratches formed a sort of spider's web, and I wondered if they might not be the sticky nets of human futility, hung up on a moonless night to dry. I did not wake up the midget who had made this dreadful thing. I smoked, listened to imagined voices and the water sounds. What awakened little Newt was an explosion far away below. It carromed up the valley and went to God. It was a cannon on the waterfront of Bolivar, Frank's major domo told me, fired every day at 5. Newt stirred. While half snoozing, he put his black, painty hands to his mouth and chin, leaving black smears there. He rubbed his eyes and made black smears around them, too. Hello, he said to me sleepily. Hello, I said. I like your painting. You see what it is? I suppose it means something different to everyone who sees it. It's a cat's cradle. Aha, I said. Very good. The scratches are string, right? One of the oldest games there is, cat's cradle. Even the Eskimos know it. You don't say. For maybe 100,000 years or more, grown-ups have been waving tangles of string in their children's faces. Huh. Newt remained curled in the chair. He held out his painty hands as though a cat's cradles were strung between them. No wonder kids grow up crazy. A cat's cradle is nothing but a bunch of X's between somebody's hands. And little kids look and look and look at all those X's. And no damn cat and no damn cradle. Chapter 75. Give my regards to Albert Schweitzer. And then Angela Honecker Connor, as Newt's beanpole's sister, came in with Julian Castle, father of Philip and founder of the House of Hope and Mercy in the Jungle. Castle wore a baggy white linen suit and a string tie. He had a scraggly mustache. He was bald. He was scrawny. He was a saint, I think. He introduced himself to Newt and to me on the cantilevered terrace. He forestalled all references to his possible saintliness by talking out of the corner of his mouth like a movie gangster. I understand you're a follower of Albert Schweitzer, I said to him. At a distance. He gave me a criminal sneer. I've never met the gentleman. He must surely know of your work, just as you know of his. Maybe, and maybe not. You ever see him? No. You ever expect to see him? Someday maybe I will. Well, said Julian Castle, in case you run across Dr. Schweitzer in your travels, you might tell him that he is not my hero. He lit a big cigar. When the cigar was going good and hot, he pointed its red end at me. You can tell him he isn't my hero, he said, but you can also tell him that, thanks to him, Jesus Christ is. I think he'll be glad to hear it. I don't give a damn if he is or not. This is something between Jesus and me. Chapter 76. Julian Castle agrees with Newt that everything is meaningless. Julian Castle and Angela went to Newt's painting. Castle made a pinhole of a curled index finger, squinted at the painting through it. What do you think of it? I asked him. It's black. What is it, hell? It means whatever it means, said Newt. Then it's hell, snarled Castle. I was told a moment ago that it was a cat's cradle, I said. Inside information always helps, said Castle. I don't think it's very nice, Angela complained. I think it's ugly, but I don't know anything about modern art. Sometimes I wish Newt would take some lessons, so he could know for sure if he was doing something or not. Self-taught, are you? Julian Castle asked Newt. Isn't everybody? Newt inquired. Very good answer. Castle was respectful. I undertook to explain the deeper significance of the cat's cradle, since Newt seemed disinclined to go through that song and dance again. And Castle nodded sagely. So, this is a picture of the meaninglessness of it all. I couldn't agree more. Do you really agree? I asked. A minute ago you said something about Jesus. Who? Said Castle. Jesus Christ. Oh, said Castle. Him. He shrugged. People have to talk about something just to keep their voice boxes in working order, so they'll have good voice boxes in case there's ever anything really meaningful to say. I see. I knew I wasn't going to have an easy time writing a popular article about him. I was going to have to concentrate on his saintly deeds and ignore entirely the satanic things he thought and said. You may quote me, he said. Man is vile, and man makes nothing worth making, knows nothing worth knowing. He leaned down and he shook little Newt's painty hand. Right? Newt nodded, seeming to suspect momentarily that the case had been a little overstated. Right. And then the saint marched to Newt's painting and took it from its easel. He beamed at us all. Garbage, like everything else. And he threw the painting off the cantilevered terrace. It sailed out on an updraft, stalled, boomeranged back, sliced into the waterfall. There was nothing little Newt could say. Angela spoke first. You've got paint all over your face, honey. Go wash it off. Chapter 77. Aspirin and Bocomaru. "Tell me, doctor," I said to Julian Castle, "how is Papa Manzano?" "How would I know?" "I thought you'd probably been treating him." "We don't speak." Castle smiled. "He doesn't speak to me, that is. Last thing he said to me, which was about 3 years ago, was that the only thing that kept me off the hook was my American citizenship." "What have you done to offend him? You come down here and with your own money founded a free hospital for his people." "Papa doesn't like the way we treat the whole patient," said Castle. "Particularly the whole patient when he's dying. At the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle, we administer the last rites of the Baconanist Church to those who want them." "What are the last rites like?" "Very simple. They start with a responsive reading. You want to respond?" "I'm not that close to death just now, if you don't mind." He gave me a grisly wink. "You're wise to be cautious. People taking the last rites have a way of dying on cue. I think we could keep you from going all the way, though, if we didn't touch feet." "Feet?" He told me about the Baconanist attitude relative to feet. I explained something I saw in the hotel. I told him about the 2 painters on the windowsill. "It works, you know," he said. "People who do that really do feel better about each other and the world." "Bocomaru." "Sir?" "That's what the foot business is called," said Castle. "It works. I'm grateful for things that work. Not many things do work, you know." "I suppose not." "Couldn't possibly run that hospital of mine if it weren't for aspirin and Bocomaru." "I gather," I said, "that there are still several Baconanists on the island, despite the laws, despite the hyuk." He laughed. "So you haven't caught on yet?" "To what?" "Everybody on San Lorenzo is a devout Baconanist, the hyuk notwithstanding." Chapter 78. Ring of Steel. I'm going to turn this up some more. "When Buchanan and McCabe took over this miserable country years ago," said Julian Castle, "they threw out the priests, and then Buchanan, cynically and playfully, invented a new religion." "I know," I said. "Well, when it became evident that no government or economic reform was going to make the people much less miserable, the religion became the only real instrument of hope. Truth was the enemy of the people, because the truth was so terrible. So Buchanan made it his business to provide the people with better and better lies." "How did he come to be an outlaw?" "It was his idea. He asked McCabe to outlaw him, and his religion too, in order to give the religious life of the people more zest, more tang. Wrote a little poem about it, incidentally." Castle quoted this poem, which does not appear in the books of Buchanan. "So I said goodbye to government, and I gave my reason, that really a good religion is a form of treason." "Buchanan suggested the hook, too, as a proper punishment for Buchananists," he said. "It was something he'd seen in the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussaud's." He winked ghoulishly. "That was for zest, too." "Did many people die on the hook?" Not at first. First it was all make-believe. Rumors were cunningly circulated about executions, but no one really knew anyone who died that way. McCabe had a good old time making bloodthirsty threats against the Buchananists, which was everybody. And Buchanan went into cozy hiding in the jungle," Castle continued, "where he wrote and preached all day long and ate good things his disciples brought him. McCabe would organize the unemployed, which was practically everybody, into great Buchanan hunts." about every 6 months, McCabe would announce triumphantly that Buchanan was surrounded by a ring of steel, which was remorselessly closing in. And the leaders of the remorseless ring would have to report to McCabe, full of chagrin and apoplexy, that Buchanan had done the impossible. He had escaped. He had evaporated. He'd lived to preach another day. Miracle!